Okay. Hello, everyone. If you've attended these for years, like Jen said, I have done something in these many years in a row. In fact, I remember one of the first ones there at the U of M in person. I think I did something actually on eBird at the time. So, yeah, 2024, I pitched the idea to Jen that we do a big year at Carpenter. And, in order to sell the idea, I wanted to make sure we did enough bird programs to really give a sampling of the entire year because part of it was also a little bit selfish, not going to lie. I love sight birding. I like doing big years, but I especially like sight big years, so effectively geographically restricted. You'll see the word dominate here on the screen. This is me being a little bit cheeky, a little bit fun with it because I have the tendency to overdo things, and I think you catch that from a lot of the presenters. I think Ezra's a really good example. It's overdoing things in a good way because you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you find out what is available out there. So let me see if I can get this to advance. There we go. All right, hopefully that didn't jump too far on me. Nope, it didn't. So just super quick, if you're not 100% sure what a big year is just literally an effort focused on maximum species count identification. Typically, it's geographically restricted, though that geographic restriction uh, is variable depending on what the big year is about. And then also keep an eye on that second statement, typically via sight and sound. As you just heard from Ezra, you have to push the boundaries if you want maximum, and that takes certain ideas. So just a couple of really quick examples. The current worldwide record holder is R1 here at 6,852 species in 1 year. John Weagle has the ABA area. So that's a geographic area that's like North America, basically certain boundaries and stuff at 840. The Minnesota statewide record is Petter. He lives up in Duluth, recently retired, 335 species in 1 year. Now, this is talking about an aggregate big year. It is taking multiple people's reports from a given property location that's much, much narrower, even than a county level. It is going to be property level. So the why of this, I kind of covered an opportunity to educate the public, to create a program series for some programming that might not happen very often. It also created an opportunity for us to write monthly newsletters to those that had subscribed to it and kind of tell them what's going on, what to expect the next month, those kinds of things like that. So it's classic nature center engagement opportunities wrapped into something that is a little bit of a treat for me or for those individuals that like to overdo it a bit. So throughout the year, we effectively augmented Carpenter's natural programming. So Jen already organizes Saturday bird walks. They get an expert out to just walk around every first Saturday of the month, all year long, deep into winter, the whole bit and stuff. It could be 15 below, and we'll still be out doing something. Additionally, they have public bird banding days, one a month, every month of the year, but they also band every Friday all year long. And so those are individuals that are seeing, capturing, reporting birds, things of that sort. We added American woodcock walks back into the mix, a spring sky watch instead of just our fall migratory watch, which we've been doing for like 7, 8 years now, specifically targeting a sparrow walk, a warbler walk, a big day, because what big year is complete without a completely debaucherous big day on property that starts at 3 o'clock in the morning, as well as BioBlitz, which is basically bird watching wrapped into identification of other species that are around. So, just a couple of the highlights from the public programming and opportunities. I took a group out early in the spring. You can see the snow is off the ground, and I immediately heard the cacophony of a mixed blackbird flock. Those are really exciting, really good opportunities. And while I was walking them down the path towards that group, I froze and I was like, there's rusty blackbirds in that group. Again, back to Ezra's points about identification. You can have this huge roost of blackbirds and you can pick out individual species inside of that if you get to know them. These guys to me always sound like a old school tape recorder being rewound. They have just kind of this very different quality to them. And then throughout the walk, we got treated to them just dropping down on the ground and walking around and giving us really great looks and stuff. So these are some of my pictures. We're about 15, 20 feet away from these birds, which you just don't get that close to Rusty's very often. So it was a really great treat during that program. There's also opportunities throughout the year, and you have to take advantage of these opportunities when you're doing a big year on a very isolated footprint, from a geographic perspective. So on the day that we went out, we were doing a sparrow program, and for the first time in a number of years, Jen and the staff were able to get a burn permit for their prairie space. This has been hard to come by because they have rusty patch bumblebees, which are endangered. So they got the burn, and as soon as I heard from Jen that they got the ability to burn, I wanted all the details on it because I knew I had to canvas that as often as possible. A burn is an opportunity. It's Mother Nature's regrowth cycle. But when we went out, we actually got warblers. And you heard Alyssa earlier talk about early warblers. Here's two of them here. And one of them is a little atypical for the situation. At least I thought it was atypical. So you got the palm warbler on the left in the back. It's got that chestnut cap to it, yellow undertail coverts, bit of an eye line. But then the guy in front was out there and not pumping its tail. Saw it at distance first. It looked different. When we got closer to it, realized it was a pine warbler that really wasn't all that close to any pine trees and had followed some of these other birds out into the burn to find, something to eat, whether it be toasted bugs or whatever that appealed to it. So this bird was pretty special. It is the only pine warbler that I'm aware of that was reported the entire big year as an aggregate and happened in one of our programs out of its typical, occurrence zone. I talked about a American woodcock program. So we had one we had to cancel, and then we held one, Wisconsin campus, Minnesota campus. 7 birds on the Wisconsin and 0 on the Minnesota campus. This in and of itself was very educational because I was very interested in getting American woodcock on the Minnesota campus. I hadn't gotten one yet. I bird carpenter a lot, but then I started to learn something about what the woodcocks prefer and don't prefer. It's not just that they have a nice open prairie grassland space, but it's the appropriate wooded spaces adjacent to it. And the Minnesota campus location where we were looking, we weren't getting them. You'll see a picture in a little bit where we did during the big day, but we didn't during the program, and that was highly educational. So big day. This is my goofy friend Liz Harper. Or some of you might recognize her. There's Jen in the middle, and then there's the mutant that is myself standing next to them at 6'7". So we did a big day. Nobody came out crazy early. This was 3 o'clock in the morning. Jen was kind enough to get up and get down to Carpenter so that Liz and I could start early and hit the 4 a.m. start time for it. So we had 108 species that day. By the end of the day, though, we did pick up several groups of individuals. We actually, after a little bit of a walk, we set up on the hillside. And just on the other side of me from this is my favorite tree. And we actually had a dickcissel drop out of the sky, land on that olive tree, Russian olive tree, for about 30 seconds and take off. And to my knowledge, it was the only dickcissel that showed up on either property, either the Wisconsin or the Minnesota property, the entire year. And it showed up during program on my favorite tree. I do, in fact, have a favorite tree because I stand at this point here and watch birds all the time. So I talked a little bit about the opportunity to expand boundaries. When you restrict yourself geographically and give yourself a bit of an extra challenge, it forces you to think differently. It forces you to look in different ways where you're at. So part of that isn't necessarily birds that are impossible to get, but it's birds that are harder to get at different times of the year. And overwintering is a strategy birds will use, and it's often used in the river valleys. The Carpenter properties are on the St. Croix River, and there's a lot of feeding opportunities and usually available water supply. So we get brown creepers every year. Eastern bluebirds will overwinter if the food supply is right, and cedar waxwings will do the same thing. And so there's an orchard nearby, there's fruiting trees, there's juniper and cedar berries available. All of these types of food sources in the winter time provide an opportunity that, if abundant enough, birds will overwinter. And then you might get a little bit of a treat, that third bird, the 28th bird of the year. I personally found this while hiking. A varied thrush from the Pacific Northwest uh, was a really pleasant surprise at a very difficult time of the year for me. The bird was very hard to find. Only one or two other birders saw it 2 weeks later. It was like a ghost, but seeing that and having that opportunity was really quite wonderful. Additionally, expanding opportunities is finding things that have never been found before at a particular location. So I'm not going to go through this entire list, but I do want to have it on here because once we put this program together, it makes you think differently. It makes you think, well, we don't have a lot of shorebird habitat. If the river's high, we really don't have any shorebird habitat. How are we going to add shorebirds during the big year? And you can see on this list, we added the third bird, American golden plover, lesser yellowlegs, and pectoral sandpiper. These are pretty much flyover species. And so the identification of these birds, either by sight or sound, ends up being critical. But we added 11 species that had never been reported from the Carpenter properties, and specifically the Minnesota property. Uh, in history, putting Carpenter at 228 for its Minnesota campus all time, which is an incredible number. And we'll talk about that black-throated blue warbler in a minute. So one of, I think, the most enjoyable parts of this is predicting. And this goes back to a point that Justin mentioned at the introduction, and then Alyssa kind of backed up. MOU data set. So I'll get to the MOU data set in a minute. This is another one of the targets that I had with a prairie burn. Experience has shown me that if you have a prairie burn, you have a very strong chance of a lark sparrow at least visiting that space at some point during migration. So I started going to Carpenter after work for the programs on the weekends whenever I could, and I'd walk through that. And you can see that this is post burn by a week or two or three because there are long shoots of grass coming up. But sure enough, a lark sparrow stopped there, was there for a few days. It decided not to stick around and try and nest or anything of that sort, to my knowledge. This was the only one of its species the entire year. This is bird number 139 for the year. Other individuals like Eurasian collared dove, there was an enclave, or there is an enclave of them on Neal Avenue, a few miles northwest of Carpenter, but they don't really stray off of it very much. But we had word that they had been coming closer and closer, and sure enough, a pair showed up. And by some miracle, my friend Liz and I saw them. They left the feeders that were on the ground, and then these two birds were kind enough to immediately fly into my Russian olive tree. So I could add them to my olive tree list, and then they promptly took off and did not return. So I mentioned the black-throated blue warbler. The MOU keeps data on arrivals and departures, spring and fall. I took 3 days of vacation in the fall specifically to target this species, believing that the St. Croix River Valley was our best chance to get them. So on the Minnesota property, my friend Liz and I thought about it and discussed that the trails and slot canyons, specifically along the river and deep into those slot canyons with steeper slopes, most closely mirrored these birds' preferred breeding habitat of the North Shore. Places like Tattagouche State Park, so that if they were going to come in and come along the river, they would most likely congregate in those areas for feeding during the day and then take off for further migration. I spent 3 straight days, hours and hours on property with Liz. We scoured every square inch. We did sky counts, all kinds of stuff, and had no black-throated blue warbler. But we did share the details with Armin Cohen, an individual that participated in our big year program. The next day back to work on Monday, I got notified that Armin had found an adult male black-throated blue warbler. Jason Hedlund, another participant in the program and county birder, was out there almost immediately and found a second black-throated blue warbler with Armand. By this time, I was really chomping at the bit. I got done with work. I went down to Carpenter. We found neither adult male black-throated blue warbler, but within about an hour, I found a juvenile black-throated blue warbler in the same area. Over the next hour from that, two additional birds were found, believed to be at least one adult female and possibly another juvenile, amounting to five birds, one of the largest migratory counts ever reported in the state of Minnesota. So these are birds outside breeding territory that are just moving through. So as Alyssa said, it's a very rare species. We're at the very edge of their range. We're on the very western edge of their range, but we still somehow had five of them in one day in selected habitat. This was really fun for me because I used MOU data to target the dates. I missed it by 24 hours, but it was pretty close. And then other individuals kind of picked that up and ran with it. So this is a really special bird on the year for us and for Carpenter. I've got time will be running thin, so I might move through this stuff. Some other pleasant surprises, just really quickly. There are other bird-related efforts and research programs and stuff, including wood thrush tagging projects that happened in the last year that Jen and the team uh, oversaw. During that process of looking for bandable birds or transmitter affixable birds, they actually stumbled upon northern saw-whet owl fledged chicks, meaning the Carpenter properties had nesting northern saw-whet owl this far south, which was quite wonderful. Prothonotary warblers mentioned pretty early this morning as well. It is floodplain river habitat down there, but not a really large tract of it. But at one time, we stood on the dock down by the river at the Minnesota property and had a prothonotary warbler male singing with an Acadian flycatcher singing in the woods about 100 yards away, while common terns and foresters' terns flew over the river hunting on their way north as well. And on that same big day, that's when the dick sissel was in that olive tree. An incredible alignment of birds by just putting in an extreme amount of effort. Probably one of the biggest treats throughout the year was what has been confirmed as one of the furthest south nesting records of common raven in state history. Again, you can find this in MOU data sets. These birds here, you can see these are young fledged birds, especially if you look at the base of the bill. You can see it looks a little bit fleshy, almost gummy on these birds. We got extremely lucky on our big day. We knew the birds were nesting there. We specifically went out to go see them to see the nest, and we found all four young fledged standing quietly on perches no more than 20 feet off the ground. The adults were in the area. We got pictures with them. We stood with them for about 30 minutes quietly. They were not seen later in the day. They left. And so that was the last we saw of the entire family. So we got this special treat during one of the programs. A few more pictures here. They just, all four of them just kind of stood around and quietly surveyed their surroundings and got to know the world. So I talked about being a little bit snarky at the beginning about dominating. I had set the initial goal at 190 species, and I thought that was a pretty good goal. I've done similar efforts, including an effort at Afton State Park to the north, which is much larger property, and I did not get to 190 that year. I think I got to 180. We actually got to 213. This might actually be a surprise to Jen because we have stickers made that say 212. While I was preparing for this presentation, I looked through the list through eBird and I realized there was a discrepancy, and the discrepancy is that eBird hides sensitive species. And late in the fall, I had identified a long-eared owl by call, and it wasn't on the list. So that when I was consulted, what did we end up with for a grand total? I gave the total, but I don't think I gave the total with the long-eared owl. So all the literature and stickers will say 212, but it was actually 213. So a little bit of a pleasant surprise. But from a dominating perspective, once you get a certain number of species, you are running really thin on opportunities. And that's where you have to start hitting the very edges of possibility. That's where you have to put in 40 hours of work for one or two or three more birds. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't program very well because there's not a lot of people willing to go to that nth degree. But going down that path yields some amazing things. I have done fall sky counts at Carpenter Nature Center for 7 years running. In fact, most years I will take the majority of my vacation for the year lined up to Thursdays and Fridays and just go out to Carpenter Nature Center myself or with friends on banding days and watch birds fly over. My best ever single day at Carpenter Nature Center for the red-headed woodpecker is 8 in a single day prior to last year. On 9/13, my friend Liz and I had 31. So these are individuals through the span of about 2 hours to 3 hours, individually or in pairs, mixed in with flocks of blue jays, 50, 75, 150 blue jays. Our flight corridor can push 3 to 4,000 blue jays a day during peak migration in the fall. And then there's these red-headed woodpeckers that were mixed in. And so when we went past 8, I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to get a new number. And they just kept coming. I'd never seen or heard of anything like it. In fact, when I looked, I realized that 31 was one of the highest migratory counts in state history in all of MOU data set. 2 days later, I was out and we hit 42 red-headed woodpeckers that day. It was getting so ridiculous at some point that Liz and I would train our scopes as far away as we possibly could to the north with maybe 2 miles worth of visibility, and you could start to pick them up in blue jay flocks from even a mile away. And Liz, I would hear her say, there's 3 or 4 more coming. At one point, we had 6 of them in a row, separated by about 100 feet of airspace, kind of flying individually, but as if it was a whole family that had released and they were just moving down the river. Another 5 days after that, I hit 34 more of them. It makes me wonder what was happening on the days in between, how many birds were actually out there. All three of these numbers, some of the highest that had ever occurred in state history. I subsequently got connected with Saya St. Clair of Cedar Creek Ecosystem Reserve up in Anoka County, a stronghold for the species that remains in the state that is part of the red-headed woodpecker recovery project. Saya told me via email not one of their birds is known to have left. They had a very good pin oak crop, and the birds were staying. They were caching food for the winter, and they looked like they were all going to overwinter. So this is a new group of birds. These are birds from somewhere. I've had subsequent conversations that maybe imply this is northwestern Wisconsin. Separate populations across varying tracts of woods. Chequamegon National Forest is up there, but you've got a lot of lakes and lakefront homes with a lot of oak trees and stuff. But it's very possible food supplies weren't very good in those spaces and the birds streamed out. We do not see these numbers past Hawk Ridge. We talk about Hawk Ridge being one of the preeminent locations for migratory birds, but they only get a smattering of red-headed woodpeckers. So this was new. This was something different. This was one of the most exciting 3-day spans of my entire life when it comes to bird watching. It was beyond phenomenal. If any of you were here on some of those days, you might have thought I was hyperventilating. It was absolutely phenomenal to see this happen. Additionally, I had predicted slash theorized that even though we weren't seeing it, and you're going to hear about this species later from Scott Mayes, that golden eagles actually were using the St. Croix River as a marker to fly south because we have overwintering birds in the blufflands of southeastern Minnesota as well as western, southwestern Wisconsin. There have been very few reports at Carpenter Nature Center over the years, but I figured they've got to be using it. There just aren't people watching for them that are picking them up. I'd shared this with multiple individuals, and Jason Henlett had the first one, had birded in the morning at Carpenter and gotten photographs of a golden eagle circling the area and moving a little bit back north towards Afton State Park. That encouraged me to kind of double my own efforts. I wanted one for my list as well throughout. By the end of November, we had 5 aggregate reports from the Minnesota property of this species. There was one in the previous 50 years, an indicator that the bird was just going unreported and unseen. So I'm just about at time. I do want to mention here as we get close to the close, birding by ear is incredibly important when you're trying to get to the edge of possibility. Ezra hit it, and I'll just reemphasize it. The only bobolink the entire year, because they are a shrinking species, the prairie spaces this far south are not holding them very well anymore. I had 7 to 9 to 10, maybe 12 flyover bobolinks in the early morning hours before sunrise at Carpenter, just flying overhead at high altitude. American pipit, same thing. None of them touched the ground. They were all audio. Snow bunting, same thing, all audio. One of them during a program. White-winged crossbill, same thing. Red crossbill, same thing. Common redpolls, same thing. It was all birding by ear audio flyovers. Last bird of the year, pretty close to my time, was an Iceland gull, Thayer's gull. There's a lot of skill in some of this stuff. I'm not going to lie. 20 years of birding experience and focus on some of these species groups allows you to pick out a Thayer's gull based on its wing pattern in a flock of ringbill gulls that numbers 150 or so swirling over the river. That was a really great opportunity and moment. Similar thing happened with horned grebe flying through the air and landing on the river and noticing the body proportions and sizing. 213 though, an incredible number of species to identify from one property. Carpenter's a nice sized property, but it isn't that big. So you have to hit every square inch of it in there. And when I say but much more, I'm referring to these. The amazing sunrise moments at Carpenter Nature Center and foggy mornings along the river are absolutely legendary in my opinion. And if you ever wonder where Ben is located, if it is fall and it's 6 o'clock in the morning through opening gate time or whatever, I am probably standing at Carpenter Nature Center staring at the sky. That's all I got. I think I got it pretty close to time.
That was awesome, as always, Ben. And we did start you a little late, so no worries about time. There were 3 questions, I think, on here. One was, can you tell us the high number date for the black-throated blue warbler?
It is the first week of August, I believe. And Ezra might have to keep me honest here. Um, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. I can pop that into the chat, but they peak right in that first week, I believe, of August.
The next one, you'll love this question because we had some early morning discussions about it. For big years or big days, how much do you rely on and trust observations made by other people? Do you only have specific bedded birders you allow to add to the total list, or only species you personally can confirm?
Typically, when we're doing program-based efforts, we're all together. Um, if you're doing something from a program standpoint and it's a big day and people are in other spaces and report a bird, I only typically challenge that if the bird is really significant or really difficult. If it is the difference of an alder or a willow flycatcher, I will ask if someone got a recording of it or why specifically they were able to make the identification. If site identification is very challenging, I will ask probing details on it. Typically, those are for fun. When I'm talking about big days and efforts that I'm engaging in, typically I'm doing that with either myself or a small team, and we're all together. And there usually is a bit of discussion on challenging birds or situations of the sort or whatever, so we don't end up relying upon anyone else. And typically, I don't like relying upon outside influence during my big days. I like it to be a personal knowledge effort throughout the day in that.
Yeah, I think we only had one bird that we questioned, and then somebody was able to confirm it within the week. It was, folks were pretty
Yes.
honest about that.
Yep.
Last question, and then we'll roll into Kara's program. What species were the biggest misses for the year? Thank you, Ivan. Ivan is one of our new monthly bird hike guides here at Carpenter. So if you like hanging with Ivan, you can come meet him at Carpenter. So what were the biggest misses, Ben?
That's a really good question. Because I'm laughing because my friend Liz Harper and I really poured into this. I put over 200 hours into that big year last year, and I'm going to be honest with you. This is not ego. This is just the truth. There weren't any because I knew where to look and every opportunity. Now, they were very near misses. I'll be honest with you with that. We have one pond with cattails around it, and I was able to identify one Virginia rail the entire year from that space, and the same with Wilson snipe. We were very close to missing species of birds, but we got almost everything. We were able to squeeze out a brewer's blackbird. We had some misses early in the spring that we were able to target in the fall. That's how we got to black-throated blue warbler. That's how we actually got northern parula. Alyssa talked about some of these birds that might just leap right over and you got to go to the breeding grounds. We got leapt over by a couple of warblers, but fall, they're a little less aggressive to moving south, but we were able to get some of that stuff. Now, I personally had 208 species during the year. The total was 213. So I missed a couple of birds that I didn't put extensive effort into. Uh, Gray-cheeked thrush is a really good example. Spring is your opportunity almost invariably, and I just didn't get one. Another individual did, so we got it on the aggregate list. I did not get some things I had hoped for, like short-eared owl, but a short-eared owl was spotted multiple times on the Wisconsin campus. I just didn't make it over for it. And by the way, the response was September 3rd, the first week of September. I don't know if I said August. I may have meant September, but black-throated blue warbler was spotted on September 3rd. That first week of September, there's about a 4 or 5 day window. Somebody asked earlier in the warbler, how much time do we have? If you're looking for a migratory path on a fall bird specific to a very small population like black-throated blue, you have about a 5 day window for your premium opportunity of most birds. And that's still not a lot, but that's what it ended up being.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.